Ata, for the sound of the bell. Mind calm, body at ease, breathing quiet, sentiment benevolent. Dharma friends, sitting still in vital silence, wanting nothing, we practice Eco-Buddhism together. The sound of the temple bell booms for all to cease from conflicts. The way of Buddha ushers in the dawn of non-violent global village forever. Here is the after sound of the bell. Thunder of silence, light after Dharma rain. Om Amoga Vairocana Maha Mudra Mani Padma Pravartaya Javala. Please join me in some mindful stretching as an end to our meditation practice. Taking your time to work with your breath, your body and mind coming together as one. Please come and join me in taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. We will first chant in Sino-Korean and then in English. So please join in, follow along as best you can. 시심 회명내 시방 삼세 체망 차해 성주 유체 후자야 주 시심 회명내 시방 삼세 체망 차해 성주 유체 마하야 주 시심 회명내 시방 삼세 체망 차해 성주 유체 성가야 And now in English. I go for refuge to the Buddha and resolve with all beings. I will cultivate a heart of enlightenment and realize the great way. I go for refuge to the Dharma and resolve with all beings. I will penetrate the teachings and uncover oceans of wisdom. I go for refuge to the Sangha and resolve with all beings. I will seek peace and happiness for the many and transform this world into awakened lands unimpeded. Please return now for another shorter period of meditation. Please gather around, come close, figuratively speaking, and listen to these words from the Dhammapada. This week, we're reading from the chapter called Mischief. Do not make light of your failings, saying, what are they to me? A jug fills drop by drop, so the fool becomes brimful of folly. Do not belittle your virtues, saying they are nothing. A jug fills drop by drop, so the wise one becomes brimful of virtue. Welcome to the Zen Buddhist Temple on this sunny summer morning in early August. We can hear the birds outside. The chickens and the duck are taking a rest in the chicken run, and all is well in the world at the moment. So I'm very pleased to be able to introduce you to our Dharma guardian, Osen Carla Pasalakwa, who will be giving the Dharma talk from her home space. And I believe the topic today is the Native American tradition of witnessing. So we very much look forward to hearing from Osen.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes, okay. All right, good morning, everyone. It is really nice to see you all. And I need to correct that. Maum, thank you so much for your nice introduction and for putting on this virtual Sangha gathering. I have to make one little correction to the talk. Actually, Hadru Sunam asked me to talk about a retreat that I did recently, and it was a virtual retreat, and it was done with the Zen Peacemakers International. Throughout the talk today, I'm going to ask some questions. And so if you could just, I have YouTube on here, I have both Zoom and YouTube open. Maybe if you could just answer in the chat, and these are going to be simple, nothing that you need to type a lot, just sort of yes, no. So my first question to the Sangha is, and there's a little bit of a lag, so I won't see your answers for a little bit, but I'm just curious to know, how many of you have heard of the Zen Peacemakers International? And how many, if you've heard of the Zen Peacemakers International, have you heard of their Bearing Witness retreats? So this Bearing Witness retreat that I did was, they do several of them, which I'll explain in a minute. This one was called Sending Our Voices in Prayer for Mother Earth. And this was a retreat that they've been doing for, I want to say 4 or 5 years out west in the Black Hills with a group of Lakota teachers and activists. So let me give you a little bit of background on these retreats and what they are and what people do in them. So the Zen Peacemakers International was established by Roshi Bernie Glassman. I can't remember exactly the year, but it was a long time ago. Roshi Glassman passed away a couple of years ago, but the organization is still moving on with various Dharma leaders. And the longest Bearing Witness, they have this Bearing Witness series of retreats. I believe the longest one that they've had going is every year a group of people go to Poland to do a retreat at Auschwitz, Birkenau, at the concentration camp. And basically the retreat is a gathering, and they do a lot of meditation and teachings and discussions like that. Roshi Glassman also would do these street retreats where he would actually go and live in the street with homeless people to listen to them. And the basis of all of these retreats are, it's based on the 3 tenets, they call the 3 tenets of the Zen Peacemakers order. And the 3 tenets are this: bearing witness, not knowing, and loving action. That's them in a nutshell. So bearing witness, not knowing, and loving action. And so these retreats are based on this idea of bearing witness. Now, we could do a whole, retreat just on that idea, bearing witness, what that is, what that means. And but in a nutshell, I'll just say it involves deep listening and recognizing the suffering of others, and taking that witnessing and moving forward, hopefully with loving action to alleviate suffering, but based in love. And of course, not knowing, which we hear Haji Sunim talk about a lot, not knowing, right? This is a very big part of our Korean tradition. We hear it quite a bit, this idea of not knowing. And that's not willful ignorance. That just means, well, it means a lot of things. I don't want to get into that. That's something for you to contemplate, for all of us to work with in our practice. So let me first start off by telling you a little bit about what the retreat that I participated in was like, because, as we all know, here we are online with each other, not together. And that's sad. And of course, there is always something lost, right? This human connection when we're not actually together in a room, not actually together, really interacting with each other. However, I will say that over these past few months, I've had to use, these various platforms for work a lot. I attended this Bearing Witness program online. I attended a study retreat with another Sangha. And I have to say, I've been quite pleasantly surprised at the amount of camaraderie and connection that we have been able to generate. So I will say it was a really good event with the Zen Peacemakers International, and it was a very simple platform. And I think part of the success of the program was the simplicity of it. Normally people would go and camp and stay with people for 5 days out in the Black Hills. And so there were, meals and all kinds of things. For this, it was 2 hours a day of meetings. And it was a lot of listening and some asking of questions. There probably wasn't enough discussion, and I'm sure that they'll probably try to incorporate more of that next year. But every day I committed to at least 2 hours, time on the front, time on the back, for kind of ramping up and ramping down, sort of contemplating and meditating with our teachers. So basically every day we had 3 teachers who taught us Native American, Lakota. They were activists and really active members of their tribe, really working to improve the lives of their brothers and sisters in their world. And I just want to make one interjection for people who are more interested in sort of the issues and the history surrounding our the history of Native Americans. I would recommend this newish book called The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee. Now, heartbeat, please notice that word, heartbeat. David Troyer is a Native author. He's really a lovely, charming writer. This book is very readable. And the first half of it is just a great history. He just has a great way of telling the history in a very understandable and personal way. And then he goes across the country. He took a couple years and just went across the country talking to people from all different Native American bands and tribes and organizations to see what they're doing. Because they basically, the message of this book is, don't write us off. We're here. We're here. We're people. We're doing stuff. Hey, let's look at this. We're not gone. And so that was a big part of this Bearing Witness retreat, was to hear from people that normally, a lot of us are just not connected with. So that was a big aspect of the retreat. Now let me tell you a little bit about our 3 teachers during the week. There were 2 women and 1 man. Violet Catches is an elder, and she just has this great history, and she has a history in they're all members of the Lakota family, they all speak the native language, which is a really important part of their work. And she's been involved in social activity and public health work with the Lakota people for a long time, for her whole life. And so she was one of our teachers, and she had just a wealth of history and wisdom and stories to tell us about her life and what that experience and what her experiences were. Then Renee Fast Horse Ironhawk was one of our other teachers, another social activist and worker, and then Manny Ironhawk. So they're together, and they, amongst many things, are very energetic, active people. One of the things that they are very involved in is a native language school, which they run. And if anybody would like to donate money to the school, the Lakota Native Language School, I have that information if you're interested. And they also run a really interesting program with horses, sort of healing trauma through working with horses, which is really interesting. So they just have all of these amazing programs. And so every day we would get together and we would listen deeply. And Manny Ironhawk every day would start with a beautiful prayer, a chant that was very powerful, even over the electronic medium. I would recommend that you go to the Zen Peacemakers website. You can learn more about this there. I don't want to get into like the nitty gritty of it. What I really wanted to talk about today were sort of four Dharma issues that sort of jumped out at me right during the week. And I'll have some questions, and I want to do just a couple little mini meditations with you today, based on these four really these teachings that really kind of jumped out and really touched my heart during the week. And I hope I can cover them all. I hope I have enough time. I'll try not to go on and on, which is a habit I have, so sorry. So one of the things though I want to mention is that, time and time again throughout the week, this whole idea of interconnectedness, interrelatedness, the familial aspect of all beings, it came up over and over and over and over and over again. It was a central part of their message to us, which as Buddhists, we were all pretty much either Buddhists or, very serious Buddhist enthusiasts who participated in the retreat. There were about, I want to say there were 50 of us that participated. So it was a big Zoom group. That was always there throughout the whole time. And their teachings, they went back and forth. They took turns on different topics, teaching us and then taking our questions. That really came through like water on the rock. It was beautiful how it just kept coming up over and over again in different ways. And so that was a real nice connection. They have developed a really good relationship with the Zen Peacemakers International. They seemed truly and sincerely happy to be sharing with us. Now, with that said, a lot of what was shared was difficult, really difficult stuff. And so I've been practicing. So this took place in June, and I've been practicing with it since, right? It's been sinking in, and I've been really incorporating it into my practice, both consciously and unconsciously. So the first thing that leaped out at me like a tiger was this idea of lineage. So at the very beginning of the retreat, I had asked the question to Violet Ketches. I asked her, I said, how, when there were all of these really purposeful actions toward basically wiping out the spiritual native traditions, how did it stay whole? How was it passed on? Because you're still passing it on now. How did that happen? And what was really wonderful about the retreat was they didn't just come out like, kind of give you an answer. It came out slowly throughout the whole week through their storytelling. So the first one, so I want to do just a quick, like a 30-second to 1 minute meditation. Here's my meditation for you. Hopefully you will participate just for not even a minute. I want you to sit and think about our tradition And in your mind, and within 1 minute, I want you to go as far back as you can, trying to get all the way to the Buddha. Try to imagine all the people that passed on the teachings from you, Haju Sunim and Ma'um, Samu Sunam, back to his teachers in Korea, in China, in India, right? Back, 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 back. So let's just take just a few seconds. I think I have a bell here. So handy. Maybe I can start. And so if you're ready, just close your eyes. Do this as a closed-eyed meditation. Let's think about that idea of lineage. Okay, I hope you'd hear my bell. So let's come back. Hopefully that was interesting. And I see, by the way, I wanted to mention that I see on the chat that a lot of you have not heard of Zen Peacemakers International. So I'm happy to share this with you then in particular, because I think they're a really wonderful organization. So what was your experience with that, kind of trying to trace back sort of our connection back to the Buddha? And you may have even, if you were ambitious, gone even before the Buddha, right? This idea of this thread that connects us, all of us, and the passing on of the teachings, right? Sort of the active passing on of the teachings. So Violet really told us a lot of very vivid stories about being sent to boarding school against her family's will, about being abused at the school, about her family hiding the children, literally hiding the children, and having the children go out and hide. They would actually go out across the river and hide when the agents came to try to take them away to these schools. I mean, she told us these really, really vivid, very detailed stories that were, to many of us, be, quite shocking. Um, and so she told us a lot of these stories, but really what came out, and she finally said, and Manny Ironhawk also alluded to this, the teachings were passed on underground. That was really what came out, was that, there were just these people who kind of laid low. And in their cases, their grandfathers, their aunts, their grandmothers. Violet talks a lot about her aunt and her grandmother teaching her the language. They weren't supposed to speak the language, so they had to kind of do that on the sly. They couldn't speak it in the schools. Um, and and really just hanging on, like a tenaciousness, like a real faith that this was important, and stepping back and just doing it, and it didn't, of course, not everybody unfortunately received all these teachings, but somehow they kept it alive. And so that was something that I think about a lot in our practice, how, we often hear this line, these precious teachings, right? This precious human life that, to find the Dharma, to hear the Dharma is such a rare thing. To hear these deep teachings, to have a tradition passed on to you, is such a rare, precious gift. So that really came across in the stories that Violet told, in particular the stories that she told. I want to mention, so one of my favorite koans, so there's this book of these koans. It's one of my favorite koans. It's a really long one, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but there's a line in it, a lot of these koans are like, the master and the monk, and they're talking to each other, and then the lineage gets passed on, right? The Dharma is somehow passed on in this unspeakable, inexplicable way. And the line is, it's really interesting. So they go through this whole, rigmarole, crazy talk back and forth. Fishing pole is passed over, and Chuan Si is the monk, and I'm sorry, Jia Shan is the monk, and Chuang Si is the teacher, and he says, then the master instructed Jiansha, saying, from now on, erase all traces, but do not hide your body. And clarified just this. Now you have this. Do not live in a city or a village. Just be in a deep mountain or on a farm and guide one or half a person. Succeed in my teaching and don't let it be cut off. So when I was hearing her talking about all of these different ways that her aunts and her grandmothers, the women, were really important in this passing on, kind of this underground passing on of these traditions and ideas, and the language in particular. I think about this: just be in a deep mountain or on a farm and guide one or half a person. That's what we need, and don't let it die out. And so that was so beautiful. I wanted to share that with you. And so one of the Dharma prompts then for this, that I'm offering to you, and this is an offering to you, by the way. I thank you for your time, and I am offering this to you just to share different ways that we can study the Dharma in these strange video times. To think about this idea of the continuity of the Dharma, and are things ever lost? Can they ever really be lost? How would that look? This is just really good kind of Dharma stuff, to chew on. So that was the first thing that really jumped out in the retreat, was this idea of lineage, and that, and again, this is just one group of people, right? I mean, these types of things played out across the entire continent of North America in different ways with different Native people. So that was really interesting to me. So taking that to the next level, when Violet was talking about giving us all of these beautiful, amazing stories of her life, she talked about one thing that her grandmother in particular, so she was just a little girl, she remembers this, and she said they would be outside doing work, actually collecting things and doing stuff. And her grandmother would actually give them rocks, like, here, sit here, hold this rock, like a big rock, and say, I want you to listen to this rock. I want you to hear what it has to teach you. Now, of course, that could have been a way to get the kids to just sit still for a little bit, stay out of my hair. But it was more than that. And she was very clear that it was even more than that. She said, they were regularly instructed to listen to rocks, to listen to the wind in particular, to listen to all of these living things around us. Now, I know we don't think of a rock as a living thing, but in the bigger Indra's net Dharma picture, they are living, right? Because they're not separate, right? Nothing is separate. And so that was really beautiful. And she had such joy when she was telling this story. And again, I mean, that was where she, they really, really, really wanted to make this point to us. This aspect of the teaching is so important to us, and we need to keep it going with our children. I mean, that of course was the biggest problem, biggest fear, because there are a lot of problems with the children these days. It's there's a lot of trauma, and a lot of, I'm going to get to that in a minute, and a lot of sadness and a lot of trauma. So this was really really important. So when she was telling this story, immediately, I mean, there are lots of Buddhist teachings, Zen teachings in particular, that came up in my mind. And, there's this idea of, and Kusa, I hope I'm not pronouncing this wrong. I'm sure I am, but there's this idea in the Buddhist teachings called Buddha Vachana or Buddha Vachana or Buddha Vakana. It's the voice of the Buddha. Okay, so the voice of the Buddha. And, the way that she was telling these stories about the teachings, really, it just, that again, it leaped out at me like a tiger, like this teaching. Dogen Zenji has a whole fascicle on the teachings of the insentient. And one of his fascicles in the Shobogenzo, his big writing with all of these sort of essays, fascicles on different topics. One of them is called Valley Sounds, Mountain Colors, Keisei Sanshoku. Um, I've read this to the group before, and I'm going to read it again because I think it's one of the most powerful little vignettes in all of Dogen's teachings. But it's a poem that in Keisei Sanshoku, a monk, after having sort of this awakening, recites, and he says, and this translation is from Shohaku Okumura. It's translated in various ways by different people. He says, colors of the mountain peak and echoes of the valley stream, all of them as they are nothing other than my Shakyamuni's voice and appearance. So I'll read that one more time. Colors of the mountain peak and echoes of the valley stream, all of them as they are nothing other than my Shakyamuni's voice and appearance. And so this idea of hearing the Buddha's voice, you know, in the technical translation, like if you look it up in the big Buddhist dictionary, you know, they have this big, you know, academic kind of a, you know, well, the teachings of the Buddha and blah, blah, blah. But on a more experiential, kind of intimate practice level, it's, as Dogen wants us to sort of understand it, to incorporate this into our practice. Where do we hear the Buddha's teaching? So the colors of the mountain peak and the echoes of the valley stream aren't coming at us with the teachings of the Buddha. It doesn't come from the outside. Rather, we're hearing with the ears that hear the Buddha's voice. At least that's my takeaway from Dogen, from how he sort of wants us to practice, to really generate and activate that open listening. And so I wanted to, again, do like a little quick 1-minute meditation just to take a break. So I'm going to ring the bell. And what I'd like you to do for this minute is, you know, you're in a room somewhere. It may be very quiet. You may be hearing things. I'm hearing the birds a lot and crickets. Just want you to listen to the ambient sounds and just think, how could that be? How could that possibly be the Buddha's voice? You know, just sort of think about that, kind of almost in an intellectual, sort of cogitating kind of way. So let's do that for 1 minute. Okay, so I hope that was a nice little meditation, something, another sort of concept to chew on. By the way, if anybody has like a specific question, type it into the chat box. I'm sort of keeping an eye on it there. And remember, there's a little bit of a lag between us. So go ahead and type that in. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep rolling. So there are 2 more concepts. I've got a few more minutes to talk. And so there are 2 more things that I wanted to mention. And these both have to do with Renee Fast Horse Ironhawk and her teachings. I'm not really going to talk about Manny Ironhawk today. That would be a whole other day, I think. But Renee and Violet, I think, had the teachings, you know, throughout the retreat that, again, you know, sort of tiger-like leaped out at me. And this is this idea of trauma. So if lineage is passed on in a good way, right, the Dharma teachings, the teachings that promote well-being and foster happiness, there are other things that are passed on with our lineage that are traumatic and cause a lot of suffering. And this was something that Renee really talked a lot about. And again, I'm not going to tell all the stories in particular in detail. Again, you can read David Troyer's book for that. But they were there. There were a lot of the point being, these events that happened in the past are still affecting the community today in a big way, and that this trauma gets passed on sort of unconsciously, and it even gets passed on genetically. And that's been shown, actually, in the scientific world. There's this field called epigenetics, where it's not necessarily the expression of our genome, it's the way the genome is packaged, which then affects how things are expressed. And this has been shown that trauma literally gets passed on generation to generation in different ways. And it's still a field in its infancy, but this is not an unusual scientific concept anymore. It's pretty accepted in the epigenetic field. So she brought that up, and I really appreciated that. And I will say that Renee had a really brave and courageous, but unbounded generosity in her devotion to this retreat. She didn't sugarcoat things and mince words, and yet she was so kind and so loving. It was just so obvious, again, even over this weird electronic, medium. And so the question that came up in my mind as this was coming out over the week, throughout her various talks, was, I get that. I don't understand another person's particular trauma, right? We can't get inside their skin and sort of understand their trauma. But the question for me is, how can we help people appreciate that? That just because something's over, something happened a long time ago, it doesn't mean it's gone, right? So sort of the consequences really go far, and it's difficult to undo that, or to forge a new path. And so my question isn't so much about how do you do that. That's what we're all trying to work on. But my question is, how do we get people to just appreciate that this is real, that this is a thing, that some of the trauma that I feel today goes back to my grandmother, quite literally, and certainly for groups that have experienced really severe historic trauma. It doesn't just go away. And she really, really, really wanted us to appreciate that. And I really appreciated her forthrightness, and honesty, and her energy in wanting us to appreciate that. So, how can we do that? So this is a koan, right? How can we do that? So first, we're not going to meditate on this. I just want you to think of a situation where you were misunderstood. It could be a minor misunderstanding. It could have been a really serious misunderstanding. Think about a time when you were trying to convey something and it just didn't go, or somebody just totally took your words the wrong way, totally twisted them. And think about how that feels. Now, I don't want you to meditate on that too long, because that's not pleasant. I don't want to, create suffering. So think about that, like, oh yeah, oh gosh, it's terrible to not be understood. But now I want you to turn that around and think about a time when you felt you had, like, somebody totally got you. Like, you were like, oh my gosh, somebody totally totally got it. Oh, I just saw a question, and the thing is from Spencer. He says, how do you think the karmic cycle and the field of epigenetics talk to each other? That's a really good question. I didn't want to bring up the K word, karma. That's a really tricky, sticky Buddhist concept. I think that's a concept that that there's a lot of misunderstanding around. But it definitely is, at its very basic level, this idea of cause and effect, that when something happens, it has, I would just say personally, when something happens, the effects are way more than we can see. That's what I would say, is that the complexity of it is beyond our understanding, really. And to just appreciate that. So I would keep it at that without getting into a talk on, what is probably one of the stickiest Buddhist concepts, and probably one of the most misunderstood ones there is. Because I think different groups, different people interpret that differently. This is a good question. Thanks for asking that. So think about a time when somebody totally got you. I mean, they just got you. You know, it's that's a good thing. So then I thought about that and I thought, oh, that's sort of what we want to generate. And so that active practice of trying to get what people are saying, even if we don't agree with them, even if we don't, even if it's making us angry, just at least trying to have that sort of internal understanding, at least of their experience. That was a really big part of Renee's, I think. I mean, that was my feeling of Renee's message to us. And so I want to close with a few things, sort of the most important part that I would like to talk about Renee's teaching. It was very emotional retreat. People, they were emotional, everybody, not in a bad way. I mean, this was in a very heartfelt communication kind of way. But she sort of spontaneously told us a story of an experience she had. The camera watch out for the book. That's funny. I don't even, yeah. Um, Spencer just put if everybody sees the chat, a funny comment. So she talked about this experience she had. I mean, it was a spiritual experience. She had. And she just shared it with us. And it was very powerful. And to share that kind of experience not only takes a lot of courage, because there's always the risk of people going, oh my God, you're crazy. It takes a lot of courage, but it also there's a risk there of kind of diluting it, and I've heard that from several teachers. So there's a teacher in the Tibetan lineage. His name is Andrew Holisek. I took an online course with him. I'm kind of an online course junkie, so you all should know that about me. I have a problem. I probably need an intervention. And he talked about an experience that he had, and he said, "Look, I'm telling you this for a reason because I want to teach you, but just know I was taught." You have to be very careful about sharing those really deep, really sensitive, powerful experiences. And I thought that was really interesting. Uh, it's it's a really interesting concept, and so it made me really think about it made me really appreciate Renee's, again, her courage and her generosity and her kindness, because she really did it in a spirit of love. That was kind of her. As a matter of fact, she actually apologized to us, and I'm like, oh no, this should be the other way around. Um, Basically, she was just saying, look, we just, we understand this, and we really love you. So it made me start thinking about our teachings and how we pick our teaching. So there's a real, in our culture, I think it's been my experience, and of course, this is also because I'm a scientist. Um, we really intellectualize things. And that isn't to say that our intellectual mind is a bad thing. It's not. We need it. It's a part, but it's a part of things. And that internal experiencing kind of really, as Dogen would say, dropping off body and mind is it's not talked about, not just because it's difficult to talk about, but I think there's a sort of a fear factor around it. So um, I wanted to mention something, just sort of close with a couple of teachings from different mystics. So, most religions have sort of a mystical arm to them, sort of mystical Christianity, Sufi tradition of Islam, and as a matter of fact, there's a biography of Dogen Zenji called Dogen Zenji, Mystical Realist. I thought, wow, that's an interesting title, Mystic Realist. It's a really good book. I recommend it if you're wanting to learn more about Dogen. Um, but I appreciated Renee sharing that really deep, really vivid spiritual experience with us. And it made me, I mean, I did receive a gift from her. It made me less afraid of it. I mean, I think again, there's a fear factor around it. So I wanted to share with you a few things. So, um, one of the Christian mystics, there was Hildegard of Bingen. I think she was in Germany. And I have this really wonderful quote of her, mystical scientist. It says there, Jennifer mentioned in the chat. So Hildegard of Bingen, this is a wonderful quote from her, and it's just so Zen. She said, "You understand so little of what is around you because you do not use what is within you." I'll say that again. You understand so little of what is around you because you do not use what is within you. And so, as somebody who's been practicing Zen Buddhism for a while, and in particular teachings of Dogen, this is an aspect of our teaching that I really love and I have found to be really wonderful. Ironic mention, because I'm a book junkie, again, probably need an intervention. This book that I read last year called The Conference of the Birds. So actually, here's a question. Has anybody ever heard of this book? I'm really curious to know who has heard of this book by Attar called The Conference of the Birds. It's a 13th century mystic Sufi poem. And in the short version of it, so they're the birds get together and they have a conference. They want to find a new leader. And they go on this quest. And really, it's full of all kinds of crazy stuff. I mean, it's awesome. But they're going off to they're going on a spiritual quest, is what they're doing. And 30 birds make it on this spiritual quest. And I love in the book, this translation by Shole Wolpe is really wonderful. And they have to go through 7 valleys to find this place, this great, to go through this spiritual, mystical journey. And they're referred to as wayfarers. So I just want to read this to you, and I want you to tell me, I want to say, how Zen is this? Okay. So here are the 7 valleys that they have to go through. The Valley of the Quest, where the wayfarer begins by casting aside all dogma, belief, and unbelief. That sounds pretty Zen to me. Valley 2, the Valley of Love, where reason is abandoned for the sake of love. Number 3, the Valley of Knowledge, where worldly knowledge becomes utterly useless. Valley 4, the Valley of Detachment, where all desires and attachments to the world are given up. Here, what is assumed to be reality vanishes. Valley 5 is Valley of Unity, where the wayfarer realizes that everything is connected. Heard that before. Everything is connected, and that the beloved, with a capital B, is beyond everything, including harmony, multiplicity, and eternity. Valley number 6, the Valley of Wonderment, where, entranced by the beauty of the beloved, the wayfarer becomes perplexed and steeped in awe, finds that he or she has never known or understood anything. It's the Valley of Poverty and Annihilation, where the self disappears into the universe and the wayfarer becomes timeless, existing in both the past and the future. Wow. I mean, seriously, if you get this book just to read Ms. Wolpe's introduction, it's worth it. That was pretty Zen. And so my point to wrap up with, because we're about out of time, I have to wrap up with the Buddha because this is a Buddhist gathering. This idea of love. Loving action was the 3rd tenet of the Zen Peacemakers International. And that whole idea of love and loving action came across. And some people will say, well, love, we don't talk about love very much in Buddhism. And that's not entirely true, because I will read from the Pali Canon, from the Itivuttaka, just one little piece of one part called Loving Kindness Shines Like the Moon. It's a big long part. I'm just going to read one part of it. So this is the Buddha. Just as the radiance of all the stars does not equal a 16th part of the moon's radiance, but the moon's radiance surpasses them and shines forth bright and brilliant, even so, whatever grounds there are for making merit productive of a future birth, these do not equal a 16th part of the liberation of mind by loving kindness. The liberation of mind by loving kindness surpasses them and shines forth bright and brilliant. Loving kindness shines like the moon. And then he goes on and talks about it shining like the sun and then shining like the dawn in the morning. So don't let anybody tell you that loving kindness is not a part of the Buddhist tradition. If somebody tries to pull that on you, it's not true. Sorry, I am going to actually come out and say that. At least it isn't for me, not my practice. And I hope that maybe some of you might become supporters of Zen Peacemakers International. That would be nice. I think it's a really wonderful group. I would encourage you to check out their website, which is very informative. And I really, again, I offer this to you in the spirit of hoping that your practice brings you great joy and great beauty. And I wish you all well, great health and great joy and happiness. Thank you. And back to the Buddhist temple in Ann Arbor.
So thank you for a talk that delighted and inspired us. Whenever Osen offers us a teaching, I feel I hearken back a little bit to the days of the Buddha, in which every teaching that we read about it sort of ended, and the disciples were delighted and inspired. So you've given us a lot to chew on, a lot to explore. And perhaps Osen will be providing some additional information that we can put into our e-bulletin, such as information on peacemakers and some of the references that she gave us today. So thank you very much, Osen. I want to, in announcements, just start with expressing gratitude to all members of our Sangha for showing up for service, for coming to the park and sitting with us in the early morning, for coming to Wednesday evening service, and for doing work practice outdoors. Yesterday, we spent a lot of time painting the fence, putting another coat of paint on the fence. And our pathway is going to be beautiful when it is finished. Stones are being laid where plywood boards used to be. Also, thank you for your continued donations in these times of financial stress. So that being said, let's move to events that are upcoming right after service. Most likely in the chat box, you're seeing a link to tea time with Tongsun and Kusa. We also have a Refuge Dharma meeting right after service. And throughout the week, every morning, 6:15 a.m., every day of the week except Wednesday and Saturday, we are in Burns Park. So please come and join us. Come and join us for Wednesday evening service at 6:30 p.m. Ulaanbaatar Day is coming, and on August 30th, this will be an outside event. This is a special time of interconnection, of reconciliation, of dealing with trauma and things like that in our lives. So I'm going to read just a few sentences about this service. Ulaanbaatar Day is a rite and service for the dead and others missing from our lives. We wish them a rightful place among the living and released from suffering in their next rebirth. Ulaanbaatar Day is an opportunity to honor with gratitude and love someone who is important, to wish loved ones peace, happiness, and spiritual growth in their new life, and to heal troubled emotions and offer reconciliation for past conflicts. So in your life, if someone has passed away, if you've been through an event such as a divorce or separation, or some other type of trauma, these are examples of what can be worked with in Ulaanbaatar Day. There is a little bit of advanced preparation. If you are interested, please contact the temple and we will inform you of what that preparation is, and then show up on Sunday, August 30th for our outside event of healing and reconciliation Ulaanbaatar Day. Okay, So that is it from the temple today. Thank you so much for joining us, and please be well.